So we only actually have a relatively short time. It's nice to see all the young people here joining in. We have a Bhattacharya later on. So generally my Dhamma reflections are a reflection of my own current activities. You know, what I've been reading, what I've been discussing with other people. I mean, sometimes, you know, there's a specific theme or topic that's presented. Usually it's just extemporaneous. So I've kind of coined a phrase that summarises this line of thought. So metaphor is the foundation of human understanding. That's my kind of little reflection. Metaphor is the foundation of human understanding. So metaphor, example, simile, paradigm, model, algorithm. Essentially a story. A metaphor is like a story. So one story I've experienced quite a bit. Been in Malaysia, we hear the thunder. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of thunder. And we all know that up there's a god called Thor, has a big hammer. You know that story? From Greek times. And Thor would get kind of grumpy and angry. He'd run around and crashing and banging and making this big noise. That was the story. That was the way of understanding, giving an explanation to that natural phenomena. So obviously, meteorologically, we have a different story now. We don't tell that when the children ask, "What's that big noise?" We don't say, "Oh, that's Thor with his big hammer." Maybe you do, I don't know. It's a good story, you know. They even make movies about this guy, Marvel Comics. And there used to be a story about the Earth. The Earth used to be flat. That was the story everybody told in terms of our position on this planet. When you look out, you see like it has a few bumps, but basically it's flat. That used to be the story, and everybody believed that story. The Earth used to be in the centre of the universe. That was the story. And religiously, people were killed, crucified, if they did not believe that story. Characters like Copernicus and Galileo, so forth, suggested alternative stories, but they were seriously threatened, mostly by the church. There's a story about God making the whole universe, not just the planet Earth, God made the universe in 6 days, and then on the 7th day, I think that's today, isn't it? Sunday, so God's having a rest. And a lot of people still believe that story. It's a very old story. But many people believe that story. I mean, creationism, it's a story. And archaeologically and scientifically, so forth, we have a lot of suggestions. We have alternative stories. The Big Bang is one of those stories. It's a story. It's just a guess. Beginning of the universe. So what happened before the Big Bang? I mean, that's the... I want to know that story. Nobody has much of an answer. So these kind of attempts to explain why we're here, what's happening, how things came to be, why things are like this, the nature of disease. Lots of stories. So we have a Buddhist story, many different Buddhist stories. There's one about the Buddha's birth. He was born standing up and immediately took 7 steps, and from each step a lotus flower came from the ground. And then he stopped and raised his right hand and declared in a loud voice, "This will be my final birth." I mean, do you believe that story? It's a good story. So what we have is a challenge to find the truth. We need to develop a very personal, direct story, immediate, in terms of the truth of our own life. What is the nature of your experience? So there are lots of suggestions. So all of the Jataka stories, I mean, it's generally agreed that they're not directly from the Buddha, but they're still good stories. They're useful stories to reflect on the paramitas and ways of helping us understanding. So this idea of metaphor as the foundation of human understanding. It's not actually understanding directly, but we use stories to help us understand. So the Buddha actually said there is no metaphor, no simile for Nibbana. I mean, words are conditioned, Nibbana is unconditioned. We can only generally point towards. We can give an indication, we can tell a story about our life, our experience. So one of the foundations of my own faith, as it developed in terms of religion, so I read a lot, talking to a lot of people, meeting with, practitioners in different traditions. And although the story, like the Jesus story, the Muhammad story, the Buddha story, the Confucius story, all of these different characters in different times in history, different geographic locations. When you start to look at the different stories, there are common elements there. So you start to think, well, they're talking about the same thing. So my conclusion is there is essentially only one reality, only one truth, but how do we explain it? So I often use the example, we have an orange, there's too many people here for this to work, but say if there's 5 or 6 people, have an orange and we cut it into maybe 6 pieces. Each person gets 1 piece, same orange, they taste it, and then they have to write down a description of the taste of an orange. Of course, you're going to end up with 6 different stories. And somebody who has previously tasted an orange could read each of these different stories and say, oh yeah, what they're talking about is an orange. Yeah, I can see that. Different stories, because we use different language, different metaphors, different references and so forth to explain something. Because what can you say about the taste of an orange? It's tasty. it's sweet, it's juicy, we can't actually scientifically, we can't kind of prove actually that an orange tastes like that. There might be a chemical formula, I don't know, but if you get a sense of that, the difficulty to communicate truth or reality. You're giving directions to somebody, how to get you're in some other part of town, how do you get to Bubs? Oh, you go this way or you go that way. Everybody tells a different story. Some people like to go on this road, some people like to take the highway, some people like to use the small roads, even using different GPS systems. They will plan different routes. The destiny, the arrival, the journey is the same, but the journey is different. So for each one of us, we have a unique set of conditions that we're looking to develop understanding. And essentially the problem is one of suffering. And this question, why do I suffer, and how can I not suffer? To develop an understanding in that respect. Essentially the Four Noble Truths is the simplest story in the whole Buddhist canon. There's suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path. The path is, requires more time than we have, but it's not that difficult to see the relationship between desire and suffering. In principle, can see that. When you want something and you can't get it, you can get very frustrated. Being able to recognise the foundational dynamic, the core principles involved, that the first three Noble Truths will give you that. The detail is the problem. To apply, to take that story, if you will, and apply it directly to your personal life. Very difficult, actually. And different people will. This whole business of desire, craving, attachment, addiction, we're all dealing with it. So it's kind of like a journey. We have a map, we have a collection of stories, trying to draw from that something that we can apply directly in our own life. So we consider, we experiment, we study, we discuss with other people, do retreats, we meditate, to try and develop an understanding, to deepen our understanding. And the stories will give us ideas, they'll give us suggestions, they'll present certain possibilities. But basically, this story, the Buddha gives a teaching, but is just pointing the way. Each one of us has to actually undertake that journey. We have to craft our own story, and the details of the basic story is the same: suffering, the cause of suffering, and the end of suffering. That's the basic human story. In terms of Buddhism, how we actually complete, that's just in terms of if you were writing a book, it wouldn't go very far, just that much. We need, in terms of your personal life, you need more detail. You need to inquire into the nature of your attachments, your suffering, your hindrances, your defilements. These are the things that cause the suffering. So we need to enter into some kind of dialogue. The practice of contemplation, investigation, the development of wisdom, the development of insight. So meditation generally, what we have to conduct that inquiry is the mind. So this kind of somewhat paradoxical. We need the mind is investigating the mind. It's trying to scratch the back of your hand. You can't do that in a mechanical sense, but we can. We have this quality of awareness, this ability to simply witness or to know. Like you can all hear me speaking. I've had that confirmed, unless there's a problem with your ears. You can hear me speaking. How do you know? And there's no answer to that. It's kind of like, it's just part of the story that we actually take very much for granted. But to consider this quality of knowing. So if you have your eyes open, you can see me moving my hand. How do you know? You can see. One is hearing. You can hear my voice. One is seeing. You can see my hand. The knowing is the same. This witnessing, this seeing, this direct direct knowledge. So when we stop, physically, sit still, we withdraw from the senses, so we close our eyes. What do we see? What do we hear? What do we taste? I mean, these are faculties of the mind. There's no eyeball inside my brain or where that seeing, that knowing, is beyond description, actually. There's not much we can say. But we know what we know, we see what we see, and our willingness, our interest, our appreciation of the value of that inquiry, that process. We've got two groups here. I'm probably talking more to the back rows. I don't know how much you kids are following along. It's the way we tell a story. I mean, as I say, I'm talking more to the back rows. When you tell a story to your children, you literally tell. It's quite simple. Maybe it has a moral, some kind of point, but the language is quite simple. To communicate difficult concepts like truth, like reality, like freedom, joy, love, compassion. The stories, need some layers. You need a few characters. But the main character in the story is, I point here, this character, and you can point to your own character. So you have your story. Generally it starts off, stories for children, once upon a time. Once upon a time there was me. And I did this, and I felt that, and I thought this. I was happy, I was sad. And that story goes on, and we're engaged in that continuing dialogue. And who's talking to who? When you see a thought, so we talk in terms of me and my body, me and my mind, my thoughts. I am somebody or something that has thoughts. And it is a paradox, because it's the mind witnessing to the mind. And there's different Pali words. But experientially, just see it, don't make it a problem. When you see happiness, you just a recognition. Very much the Satipatthana Sutta, considered the sort of meditation manual by some. It's very much about awareness. When the meditator is standing, the meditator knows, I am standing. Bending over, to know you're bending over. When the mind is cramped, you know the mind is cramped. It's not a evaluation of the situation. It's just this simple knowing. And what do we know? The only thing that we can ever know is this. This is at the heart of the story. It's a living story. The story, what we get in the books, including the Tipitaka, it's not a living thing. It's just a bunch of words written in a book. And I reference the Quran, because that book, it's just a book, pieces of paper. A useful book, a valuable book, worthy of respect, blah, blah, But just seeing that, the stories that we have, they're just stories. What's happening now? This is a living story. You're all part of my story. In a small way, I've taken a few snapshots, got them filed away. They're a bit blurry. But this story, here, everywhere I go, the main character of the story is here, and being able to really craft that story, because we do have some choices, you know. And then Ajahn Kusalo got out and he went out the door on the west side. I don't know which way we are, or I could go out the door. That story, it's possible. I could go out this door, or I could just sit here. The choices we make, the story that we write, the life that we live, to be a direct participant in that. It's not, you know, when you're reading the book, there's a sort of voyeurism there. You get engaged with the different characters, and so, well, that's quite fun. But this life, this story, this reality. So the more clear the mind is, the more awake we are, the less confused we are. And this is why we meditate, to develop that clarity of mind. The more beautiful the story will be, the more inspiring the story will be, the more the story will, in a sense, incline to Nibbana. I mean, that's the point, this third possibility, the ending of suffering, nirodho, cessation. Very difficult to see. I mean, we intellectually we can understand the logic of that. I mean, if I got more engaged with the kids here, they can understand suffering, the cause of suffering and the end of suffering. We can find stories that would exemplify that. They want to watch television and they're not allowed, or they want it. So they suffer. You just relax and go read a book or go for a walk. Letting go, non-attachment. Very accessible, but to internalise that, to practice that, to write that particular narrative into your story. Really, it's a choice that we each, what kind of a story do you want? Do you want more kind of Superman, Batman in your story? Or do you want the Buddha in your story? And to realise, I mean, this is tangential slightly, but Buddha is not a person, it's not a person's name, it's a human quality. We all have this dimension, this quality, Buddha, that which is awake, that which is wise, that which knows, that which is free of suffering. We all have that, maybe as potential. And the question is, do we want to bring that out in terms of our narrative, in terms of our story? That possibility is always there. As I say, the story is a living one, very much alive, where each detail we have some choice as the not completely free choice, but just to imagine you are the author of your own story. And you have that choice, what happens to the hero or the heroine, which is you. Anyway, a few thoughts which I will leave there for this morning. Everyone.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.